what would Bart Ehrman say about the Quran? And of course, Bart Ehrman doesn't talk much about the Quran, but I would like to actually read something that Ehrman did say about the Quran.
Oh yeah.
Maybe you came across this, and I just like it'll take a couple of minutes to read. But Bart Ehrman did comment on the Birmingham manuscript.
Right? Yeah, I've heard of this. It's certainly worth quoting. Yes.
Yeah. So this was.
Do you have it there?
Yeah, this was on his blog, July 25th, 2015. He says the significance of an astounding new discovery. Right. So people want to know what would Bart Ehrman. Here's what Bart Ehrman says. Okay. So I hope the Christian apologists are listening. So he begins by saying, let me say that carbon-14 dating is indeed a science, but it's not exactly an exact science. It dates organic material, so on and so forth. So he's talking about the Birmingham manuscript. It turns out that there's a 95% chance that these pages were produced between 568 and 645. How good is that? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he didn't say that, but I'm saying peace be upon him, who in the traditional Islamic teaching was responsible for producing the Quran, was engaged in his active ministry between 610 and 632. These pages may have been produced during his lifetime or in a decade or so later. He says, in case anyone is missing the significance of that, here is a comparison. The first time we have any 2-page manuscript fragment of the New Testament is from around 200 CE. That's 170 years after Jesus' death and 30 CE. He says, imagine if we found 2 pages of a text that contained portions, say of the Sermon on the Mount, in almost exactly the same form as we have them in what is now our Gospel of Matthew. And suppose that these pages received a carbon-14 dating of 30 BCE to 40 CE. Would we be ecstatic or what? Since I am a scholar of early Christianity rather than Islam, the discovery of Birmingham raises all sorts of questions for me that it would not raise for any of my Muslim friends or neighbors. One is a historical question, and one is a question of the modern Christian attempts to prove the truth claims of Christianity. He continues, my historical question is this: if these pages of the Quran do indeed show that the text of the Quran is virtually the same, say in 630 to 640, as it is in 1630 to 1640, as it is in 2015, that would suggest that Muslims are indeed correct, that at least in some circles, it would obviously be impossible to prove that it was true in all circles, that scribes of the Quran simply didn't change it. That it would suggest, let me say it again, suggest that Muslims are indeed correct, that at least in some circles, scribes of the Quran simply did not change it. They made sure that they copied it the same every time, word for word. Now, it may be that these newly dated fragments have significant textual variance from the rest of the manuscript tradition of the Quran, and if they do, that too will be immensely interesting. But my sense is that they must not be much, if at all, different. Otherwise, that is the story that would be all over the news. I remember the scholar Alba Fideli. This is now me talking. I remember that Alba Fideli, who actually discovered this manuscript. Who actually discovered it and was able to identify it, because it was 1572A something Mingana, right? And she came to UC Berkeley and she gave a lecture. So I took my class over there and we actually heard her speak. And there were other professors there that were sitting and kind of just sitting, and they were like sort of chomping at the bit, ready to ask questions. And she said, let me get through my presentation. And then finally a professor said, so what's the big deal with this manuscript? How many variants are there and how different is it? And she just said, it's exactly the same as what Muslim tradition says. There are no differences whatsoever. It's unvoweled text, right? For the most part, but there are no changes to the consonantal skeleton. Muslims know exactly how to recite it. There are 10 qira'at. There are 10 multiply transmitted ways of reading the consonantal skeleton, and they all fit in perfectly with this manuscript. So then Ehrman says here, I'll just finish with this. He says, back to my question, if Muslim scholars over the centuries from the beginning made dead sure that when they copied their sacred text, they didn't change anything, why didn't Christian scribes do the same? Christian scribes did not do the same thing. Okay, and he goes on, you can go on his blog and you can read it. But, I would say that it is impossible to fabricate the Quran, and it has always been impossible. Just as it is impossible today, it was impossible at any point in the past.
Just because it's so massively...
It's a mass transmitted living tradition that's recited, heard, memorized every day since its inception.